Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here to talk about Max Scheler. This is a really interesting person, and his thought is so exciting because he is a Catholic, and his thought is very influential within Catholic circles. Uh, Saint Edith Stein, Saint Therese Benedicta of the Cross was actually one of his students. Pope John Paul II, who also is a philosopher, wrote his doctoral thesis on the philosophy of Max Scheler. So Max Scheler is a very neglected thinker, but we will find that he's coming one sort of just a little bit after Nietzsche, who we looked at last week, and he's I think by far the more the more intensive and the more thoroughgoing thinker than Nietzsche was. Nietzsche was a very passionate man and wrote all sorts of wild and crazy things, and Scheller's very methodical, and he's a philosopher of the old school in as much as he follows through with his ideas and writes in a very thorough and very profound way. Reading him is difficult, and a lot of it is because he is a German philosopher, and he is therefore writing in a very dense way. He does not have the gift that C.S. Lewis had, for instance, of making complicated ideas approachable and accessible for ordinary people. Just the opposite. He seems to take ideas which you and I might think are commonplace and turn them into rather complex philosophical language. But as he does so, also unlocks other ideas and other insights, which are really wonderful and profound. And I'm going to just put up the first slide here for you and see if we can get that working, to just go through a few details about Scheller's life. He's born in 1874. His father is a Lutheran, not a pastor like Nietzsche's father, but a Lutheran. His mother's an Orthodox Jew. And I think these two factors together help him in his teenage years, as he's already beginning to think things through very deeply, to turn to Catholicism. He becomes a Catholic as a late older teenager. He studies with the German philosopher Edmund Husserl, who is the founder of phenomenology. And we'll go into what phenomenology is all about in just a moment. In his 50s, he moves on and leaves his Catholic faith behind and indulges in much more of a broad-ranging sort of social anthropology as his belief and his religion. He doesn't abandon belief in Catholicism as much as he abandons the practice of Catholicism, and that may have to do with the fact that he was divorced and remarried, and therefore in his personal life moved outside the church and outside of full communion. He supports the Germany very strongly in the First World War, but after that disaster, he turns away from that politically, and he's very suspicious of things that are going on in Germany in the 1920s, because he already predicted a dictatorship that would come about. A dictatorship which he also connected with the nationalism and the anti-Semitism, which had been growing out of Nietzsche's philosophy. So he very much gives an answer to Nietzsche and picks up the good stuff of Nietzsche and then expands on it, and in a way that we'll see in just a few minutes. He dies suddenly of a heart attack at age 54, just when he was working on really what was a compilation of all his thought that had gone on by then. And so he left us with an awful lot of unanswered questions. But in 1928, he dies of a heart attack, and his work is picked up very much by his students and those who follow on after him to keep the light burning. Another person who was very influenced by him was Dietrich von Hildebrand, who was also one of his students. And you probably know the story of the von Hildebrands and how they came to America and escaped the Nazi problems and found freedom here. We're going to close that screen and hope that worked smoothly this time. I'd like to go on now to talk about Max Scheller's philosophy, but before we do, it's good to just get a little bit of an overview and get our heads around what philosophy is all about. And philosophy is really all about making sense of the external world, making sense of the physical world, and trying to understand the big questions of life about what comes after death, what comes after this physical world, is there an invisible world? How does that interact with the visible world? And as philosophy moves on through history, it becomes more and more intellectual, more and more abstract. So that by the time we come to rationalism in the 18th century, they're not just talking about the external world and the invisible world and the interaction and so forth. They're really beginning to talk about how we know anything at all, and how we think, and how we reason, and how we can know that there's anything that's true. You might remember from your studies the phrase of the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who says, "I think, therefore I am." So by now the philosophers are really trying to argue and pick through how we actually know anything, and how the world actually, how we can actually perceive reality, and what is reality. And so by the 1800s, by the 19th century, philosophy has moved into this very abstract process, looking at methods of knowing, looking at methods of understanding uh, in a purely intellectual way. And Husserl, who is Max Scheler's teacher, begins with phenomenology, and the Max Scheler then takes it on a bit further. And this is really kind of exciting because philosophy had become so intellectual, and it had become so abstract. And Nietzsche comes along, and he's writing with real passion about religion, and passion about philosophy, and being cynical and tearing things down and not leaving much in his wake. And philosophy is thrown for a loop because of Nietzsche. And this gives a kind of opening for the phenomenologists to come in with a totally new approach. And the phenomenologists are getting away, therefore, from all of this abstract philosophy and the practical applications in utilitarianism, which says that you can't really know truth, and therefore what is good is what makes the most people happy. That's utilitarianism. And the class struggle of Marxism, and like we said last week, Hegel's idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and the great struggle. Those are methodologies. Those are ways of trying to know the truth and understand the truth. And Husserl and Scheler come in with a totally new approach. And this approach in phenomenology is focusing on the phenomenon of knowing, the experience of knowing, the event of knowing. And therefore, their thought is shifting from this, on the one hand, totally intellectual, abstract reasoning in philosophy, and on the other hand, these practical applications of philosophy with Marxism and Hegel and Nietzsche and so forth. And they're saying the way that we know is to look, first of all, not at all the knowledge, or not at all the facts, or not at all the evidence, or not all the applications, but to look at the human person, to look at the human person. And this is brilliant, because so many of the philosophers, being intellectual types, this is their blind spot. They're missing the human heart. They're missing the human person, and they're coming up with all these theories and writing all these books with too many words in, and thinking it all through and being very abstract and intellectual, and they're missing the human person. And Max Scheler is brave enough to take philosophy into that realm of the human person. And what he basically says is that um, to know anything is not, "I think, therefore I am, therefore I am." You could almost be saying, "I feel, therefore I am." I experience an emotion. I experience an attachment to beauty, to truth, to goodness. And this attachment that I feel, this drawing that I feel to what is beautiful, good, and true, that's the important thing. That is the phenomenon of understanding. I'll give you an example. Um, we built a beautiful new church in our parish in Greenville, South Carolina. It's a beautiful Romanesque style church with stained glass windows and a high ceiling and all the rest. And when people come into the back of the church, they invariably look up at this church and they say, "It's beautiful." Now, I've noticed this with every age group, every level of education, from the electricians who were helping to build the church, working class guys, to people who have PhDs in art history. They say the same thing. They'll say, "It's beautiful." And I'll say to them, "What do you think is beautiful?" And they look around and they say, "Well, I like the stained glass windows." You see, what they have experienced right there is they have apprehended beauty which transcends language. That's why they have trouble saying exactly what it is that is beautiful. They find something, but no, they have apprehended the whole thing as beauty. And when I say apprehended, I mean they have experienced beauty at a very deep part of their being. Now, this I think is a good illustration of what Max Scheler is getting at with his phenomenology, that knowing is an intuitive human experience which is very difficult to articulate. It's a universal human experience of comprehending and apprehending truth, beauty, and goodness, the highest values, the good things in life. And it's something that we participate in and enter into. And that is the phenomenon of knowing. Now, he wrote lots and lots of books and thought about this for an awful lot, and I haven't read all of his stuff. I'm not really a philosopher like that. I dip into it the way I dip into poetry. You know, I'm not really a great thinker, but I can see what he's getting at. And this phenomenology is therefore inspired St. Edith Stein and inspired Pope John Paul II in his writings on the theology of the body and on human love and so forth. It actually finds its root in Scheller's phenomenology, in this idea that we apprehend the beauty, truth, and goodness from something greater than ourselves. And this is the key which makes him a Catholic philosopher. And that is that he has the sacramental vision. He understands that this is something which takes place within the human heart from a source which is greater than us, which we would call grace. He doesn't use that theological language. Instead, I'm going to read a quote for you here from Scheler, translated from the German, of course, but it shows what I mean when I say he puts ordinary talk into philosophical language. He says, phenomenology is a love-determined movement of the innermost personal self of a finite being toward participation in the essential reality of all possibilities. So I'm going to put it up on the screen so you can get your head around that. Okay. Let me see if there's the second. Is that up on the screen?
No, we're not seeing it yet, Father.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay. So if we go through these points, traditional philosophy seeks to be an explanation of the hidden relations from the physical world and so forth. I won't read all through the points. It's what I've just said. But if you go partway down, phenomenology does not begin with a theory or a method, but with the human person. And love, here's his quote, phenomenology is a love-determined movement of the innermost personal self of a finite being towards participation in the essential reality of all possibilities. Another way of saying that is phenomenology recognizes God's grace drawing us inexorably to all that is beautiful, good, and true. To participate in that, to become part of it, not just know it with our heads. Now, this in philosophical terms is groundbreaking. This is radical stuff because he has the courage to introduce love as the force which is doing this. Now, when he uses the word love, he would definitely be referring to love as it was defined by Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas says that love is not the sentimental stuff that we think of with Valentine's Day. Love is not, I mean, that's a symptom of it, or that's an outgrowth of it. Love is not erotic love or even friendship or the four loves that C.S. Lewis talks about. Love, instead, according to Thomas Aquinas, is the energy force that binds the three persons of the Holy Trinity together. Wow, that's pretty amazing to think. Love is the energy force that binds together the three persons of the Holy Trinity. So love is right at the heart of God himself. And love is also the energy force through which all things were created and all things hold together. So Dante puts it this way at the end of the Divine Comedy. He says, love is that force which moves the sun and all the other stars. In other words, the energy of life is love. That's what love is. Love is this dynamo of energy within the Godhead himself. So that's a beautiful concept. And this is what Scheler means by love. Love is that energy force, that same energy force, which binds together the whole created world and binds us together as well. And it's that love which therefore draws us inexorably to all that is beautiful, good, and true. So with that being set up as Scheller's understanding phenomenology, the basic kernel of what phenomenology is all about, we then are going to look at one of his most important books, and one which was a very important source in my book, Immortal Combat, because what Scheler does is he takes the concept of resentment, which Nietzsche had discovered and wrote about, and he writes a whole book about this, and he analyzes the phenomenon of resentment. And Nietzsche coins the word, he uses the French term ressentiment as a kind of philosophical jargon for this thing we call resentment. And resentment is not just, as I said last week, being resentful because Jimmy got a bigger piece of pie than you did, or Sally won the race that you wanted to win. Resentment is a much deeper phenomenon within the human heart, which is a deep bitterness, which runs in a cycle. I call it the resentment loop, which goes on and on and on within the human heart. And Scheler picks up this term from Nietzsche, and he expands it. Nietzsche used it very, very briefly, really, in talking about the slave revolt of morality. If you remember last week, where you have the master and you have the slave, and the slave resents being a slave, but is powerless to do anything about it. And so the slave revolt of morality is that the slave flips morality and puts himself forward because he's meek and humble, and that makes his master, by definition, evil because he's strong and powerful. And Nietzsche said it was resentment which drives that slave revolt in morality. But Nietzsche kind of leaves it there, and Scheler picks up the ball and runs with it with his book Ressentiment, and he analyzes the different levels of resentment and how it works in the human heart in great detail. And it's both fascinating and chilling. And he does this because he's trying to set up the opposite of the principle of phenomenology. In phenomenology, the human heart is drawn by love to all that is beautiful, good, and true. The human heart is drawn like a magnet draws an iron filing to all that is beautiful, good, and true, the highest values of all. And the human heart longs for this and desires this by the way we're created. God created us to actually want what is good. Even bad people want what is good. They might want it in a bad way, but they long for what is good. I tried this out one time when I was doing some prison ministry in England. I was doing some rehab work with some prisoners. And I said to the guys, I said, you're here in jail because you're drug addicts and you're thieves and you've done bad stuff. And they all sort of go, yeah, ha ha ha, that's true. And I said, but you know what? You want what's good. And suddenly they all were silent and they listened. It was very moving. They said, what do you mean? I said, you did what was bad, but you wanted what was good. I said, I believe every human being wants what is good, even though they seek it in something which is very bad. I said, let me try it out. I said, what are you in jail for? He says, and the guy says, um, I used to break into old ladies' houses and steal stuff. I said, well, why did you do that? He said, to get drug money. Okay. I said, why were you taking drugs? He smiled and said, because they made me feel good. I said, so that was a good thing. You wanted something good. He said, yep, yep, I wanted something good. And the other guys woke up to this, and it was a beautiful moment of illumination because they understood, although they were criminals that were in jail, they understood that even underneath their illegal actions, they wanted what was good. That didn't make them good people, but uh, they wanted something good. I remember when I was training to be a script writer, the teacher said, to create a convincing villain, you must understand that what he or she is going to do, they think is good. Nobody, he said, wakes up, not even Darth Vader, wakes up in the morning saying, I wonder how I can be the most wicked, vile, and terrible person possible today. They want something good. So this is at the heart of Scheller's phenomenology, and he uses the concept of ressentiment, resentment, to show what happens to human nature without this, when it denies this drawing of grace, this drawing of goodness, this drawing of love to what is good and beautiful and true. And so we're going to go through now some of the stages of resentment, rivalry, and revenge, which is a major part of the first half of the book. And we're going to go through it in a little bit more detail to look at the different stages of how resentment takes its root in the human heart. And I'm going to go through these 10 different stages, and then I'm going to put them up on the screen and sort of review through them with you quickly. And we're going to put these slides up available on, I guess, on Dropbox, so that you can download them, or you can take a screenshot when I put them up if you know how to do that. The first stage of resentment, therefore, in the human heart is when there's some sort of injustice or inequality. The person may experience a real injustice. Something has been done to them which is unfair and unjust. It might simply be inequality, the inequality of a racial minority, the inequality of economic divide, the inequality of being from a stranger in another country. There are all sorts of ways of inequality. Inequality in a family, between a younger sibling and an older one, between the husband and the wife, between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, all kinds of relationships where there's some injustice or inequality. It doesn't take very long for you to think of examples in your own life and in your own family where there is some sort of rivalry, some sort of injustice or inequality. And sometimes that inequality or injustice is not actually real. It's perceived as a slight or as an injustice. It doesn't really matter, but if it takes root and that resentment takes root, then the person naturally seeks revenge. It's just part of human nature to want to get even, to come out on top and to win and to do away with this injustice, this inequality. So the second stage that Scheler then recognizes is that the resentment begins to be repressed in the person's life because of their impotence. Um, I can't get back at my boss who treated me so badly because I'm the employee and he's the employer and he can fire me. I can't tell him what I think. I can't give him a piece of my mind because I'll lose my job. So the second stage is that the resentment is repressed based on the person's impotence to get revenge. Whether it's society's norms or family or whatever it is, we don't take revenge. We repress the resentment. If we're religious people, of course, it becomes even more complicated, because then we feel that we really shouldn't be feeling this resentment. That's a bad thing to feel. And so therefore we repress it for religious motives as well. And once the resentment is repressed and pushed down, the third stage is what Scheler calls a value delusion. I call it a reversal of values. And what happens in the reversal of values is what Nietzsche picked up, is that the person who is going through who is resentful begins to um, reverse the values and say that actually all that stuff that they wanted, they don't really want anyway. It's not really worth it. Okay, give a little example. My neighbor has a BMW car, and I really want that BMW car, and I'm resentful that he has one and I don't have one. But I'm not supposed to feel resentment, so I repress that resentment, and I have to be nice to him because he's my neighbor, and I smile and I wave and I'm nice. I pretend I'm nice. So I'm all the time resenting that he has that car and I'm driving a jalopy. And then when we come to stage three, which is the reversal of values, I begin saying, you know what? BMWs are stupid. They're so expensive. They're so overpriced. Why would I even want to drive a show-offy car like that? I'm a humble person. I have this simple car, and I make do with that. You see, what's happened is we reverse the values, and it's called sour grapes. Uh, we say we didn't really want that anyway. And uh, the next stage on from that is
Father, can
the
I
fourth.
interrupt you real quick? Are we
Yes.
supposed to be seeing a screen?
No, I'm going to put the screen up after point five.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the fourth one is that we blame the rival. Uh, I start saying about my neighbor with a BMW. Not only does he drive that BMW, but he's a show-offy kind of guy. He really gets on my nerves. He's always strutting about the country club and telling me about his latest raise and all the rest of it. And so the fourth stage is blaming the other person, blaming the rival. I'm going to put the screen up now so you can see these first five steps. Okay, so the first is injustice and inequality, whether it's real or just perceived. And then we repress the revenge, the instinct for revenge, because of impotence, because of social pressure, because of religious pressure, for all sorts of reasons. We can't take revenge. We would if we could. Don't worry about that. But we don't. So we repress the revenge, which leads to the reversal of values. I didn't really want that car. I'm better than that. I don't need stuff like that. I don't really need that raise that that the other guy got. Um, I'm an ordinary guy down working at the grassroots. That's where it really matters. I'm doing what really matters. You see, we justify that reversal of values. Then we blame the rival and begin to make the rival into the bad guy in order to make ourselves better, and in order to make ourselves come out on top. Um, which leads to stage number five, which I call distorted self-regard. Now I'm beginning to tell myself that I'm actually good for doing all of this. And in fact, I'm good because I'm a victim and I am better than the other person. This is where a lot of us spend a lot of time at this stage in gossip and detraction, tearing other people down, criticizing other people, because that's making us good. And we've already gone halfway through these stages of resentment, moving deeper and deeper. I'm going to go through the other 6 stages here, and come back after all 10 are finished, so we can have a little review. The 6th stage is what I call generalized prejudice, and what happens then is that the person who's resentful starts generalizing their prejudice. So let's say a woman has been hurt by a man, and she goes through the repression of revenge and the value reversal and so forth. And then she starts saying to herself, it's not just Freddie, it's all men. It's not just Freddie who let me down and treated me so badly. All men are like that. Okay. And once a person gets into generalized prejudice, it starts getting really poisonous, because then we start identifying the blame with a whole group of people. And this happens at a family level, it happens at a group level, a religious level, a nationalistic level, a racial level, in all sorts of different ways. Um, it's the Democrats' fault. It's the Republicans' fault. It's the poor people's fault. It's the rich people's fault. It's the black people's fault. It's the Jews. It's the Muslims. It's the Protestants. It's you see where we're going with this. This is what I call generalized prejudice, where we move from the particular grievance in the particular person and we broaden out to include a whole group. And as we're doing this, what we also do is uh, we form a tribe, or we join a tribe of similarly resentful people. We identify with a group which stands against the other group. And this is part of the generalized prejudice. We find other people who also say, yeah, it is all men. All men are like that. Find a group of people and we huddle together and say, yeah, it is all those Democrats. They're rotten through and through. Yes, it is all those Protestants. They're just dumb. And this group then, this tribe, of course, reinforces the prejudice and reinforces the resentment that's there. And the when it's reinforced by others in the group, it snowballs, it grows stronger and stronger. Um, and what is also growing stronger and stronger within all this is stage number 7, which I call self-righteous bliss. Once the resentment begins to snowball in the group, uh, it feels really good. It feels much better than it felt when we were just nursing our grudge ourselves and wallowing in our sort of resentment. Now we're with a group of people who are feeling strong and suddenly I'm not impotent any longer because I've got another group of people here who are similarly resentful. And this is what I call self-righteous bliss, because what happens when the group gets together is we start to feel euphoric. We start to actually get a high when we meet with this group, because it's all self-reinforcing and we're all telling each other about the resentment and the other side and how bad they are. And we come away from meetings like that feeling really great. It's and it's like a drug. Um, and like any drug, it's an escape route to happiness. It's an easy fix. And like any drug, it wears off. And so we need to go back for more. And it snowballs again as the whole thing gets bigger and bigger. One of the interesting things in the reactions that we've had to this book is how many people have read all of this stuff, which I've tried to outline in the book, and said, "Whoa, this is holding up a mirror to what's happening in our culture right now." And it's true, we're seeing it in the news headlines and the events. But I want to say to folks, well, yeah, but it's always there. It's always been there, but usually it's a little bit more below the surface. Now we're just seeing it rear its ugly head. So this is stage 7, what I call self-righteous bliss, the euphoria that comes from this indulging in this resentment and this rivalry and this need for revenge, which continues on. Now, what happens within this self-righteous bliss also is that the person's identity is now subsumed by the resentment. This becomes their whole reason for living. They're now a martyr. They're now a good person. They're now better than everybody else, and that's part of the self-righteous bliss. It feels really good to finally be powerful. It feels really good to be on top, and it feels really good to think that you are righteous because of the things that you suffered, because you're a victim. Well, this is irrational, okay? And this is the 8th stage of this resentment syndrome. The 8th stage is what I call the irrationality of the addict. The irrationality of the addict. Anyone who has worked with people with addiction problems will realize how irrational they are. A person who's suffering from addiction can't be reasoned with when it comes to that addiction. I mean, in other areas of the life, they might be reasonable, but when it comes to the addiction, There's no reasoning. We all know those situations with, say, an alcoholic, where everyone will say, "You, Uncle Freddie, you're drinking yourself into a grave. What are you doing this for? Don't bother me. I got it under control." No, he's irrational. Um, the addict is irrational, and the addict within the resentment addiction is also irrational. This is why you can't reason with people who are in this syndrome. You can't expect to sit down and say, "Let's talk together and let's reason this out." They're incapable of reasoning at that stage. The ninth one, and I'm afraid this gets worse and worse. Um, the ninth one is that because of the irrationality and of the addict, and because they are now functioning within a totally inverted value system, not being drawn to everything that's beautiful, good, and true, but being sucked into this vortex of negativity. Um, the Scheler points out that the resentful person also gets to the point where they do not have empathy. Their heart is hardened towards truth, beauty, and goodness, but most terrifyingly, their heart is hardened towards other people. Their heart is hardened not only towards the people they perceive to be the enemy, but their heart is also hardened towards the people who they perceive at first to be their allies, their friends in the tribe. This is why notoriously people who are in this downward cycle will shoot their wounded. Why people who are in this downward cycle will actually turn on the ones who they thought who were supposed to be their friends, as well as the ones who are their enemies. We find this within cultic religious behaviors. Um, if you've ever been drawn into a cult or a religious sect, this dynamic is going on all the time, in which they're constantly looking over the over the borders of the parapet to the enemy, but they're also always on the lookout for the enemy within, and they notoriously turn on each other, and they fight amongst themselves, because of the irrationality and because this resentment has now become a deeply ingrained habit. Not only do they not have any empathy for anyone, they can't trust anybody because now they're only looking for others to blame in their cycle of resentment. The last stage, the 10th stage, is inverted values. Now the inversion of values is complete. A good has become evil and evil good. We're going to put this screen back up here so you can see review the last 5 stages. Can we see that?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. So the last 5 stages, therefore, are generalized prejudice, where uh, the person blames a whole group of people rather than just one person, and then usually joins a group or a tribe of some sort in order to have their resentment reinforced by others who share that same resentment. And this, of course, leads to the sense of euphoria or exhilaration, like a drug, which actually becomes addictive, which leads to the irrationality of the addict. You can't talk to these people. They're now on a cycle and on a treadmill of resentment and rage and blaming others and making themselves feel good by doing all of this. This is the irrationality of the addict, which leads to lack of empathy and lack of trust. Their relationships become very stilted and very artificial because it's all based on a lie. And therefore, there's no empathy. And this is why when we see this reaching its final conclusion in something like genocide, the death camps or the starvation of the Ukrainians by Stalin, or any of the horrors of the 20th century, why you will find very ordinary people behave in this psychopathic way. They unload the boxcars at Auschwitz with a very calm, straight face, send women and children off to the gas chambers, shoot others in the head, send them to the ovens, and then they go home and have a good dinner. It's because they've reached stage 9 where there's no empathy at all for others. There's no trust, there's no empathy. And stage 10 then is the inverted values, where um, the inversion of the values is complete. Good has become evil and evil has become good. And therefore, that's why when these horrors and these terrors have taken place in the world, um, the people who perpetrate them uh, very often will go home and have a good dinner and think that they've done a good day's work. They've destroyed other people. They might have done the most horrific sort of things, and do not see it as being. Not only do they not see it as evil, they see it as good. They've done something good that day. This, when we get our head around this, we can see that Scheler is basically saying, look, this, he doesn't call it the sin of the world. This is why I wrote this book, to say this is the sin of the world. This dynamic is going on everywhere. Furthermore, it's going on all the time to a greater or lesser extent in the vast majority of people. Now, that we don't all go on to be the commandant of Auschwitz, but unless we're drawn by grace out of this syndrome, this is where we're going. And our society, which is a society of competitiveness and competition, lends itself to this. Well, we're coming in on the home stretch here, and I want to just say that this person with such inverted values who's reached stage 10 not only believes that what they're doing is good, and not only believes that they're a good person, they believe that they're the best of people. I'm going to go someplace now, which is tricky, because if you're tuned in here, you're like me, you're a religious person. And if you've been thinking this through, we talked about it tonight, you may well have seen how uh, one of the subterfuges, one of the deceptions that we use in all of this, is layer upon layer, interwoven with these 10 stages, is also very often a sick use of religion, where we put ourselves up and we add religion into it as an extra layer of candy coating. Oh, we're not the sort of people who seek revenge. We forgive people. Yes, of course it's good to forgive people, but it's not good to pretend to forgive people to make yourself better than them. Okay, when we get into religion, there can be all sorts of layers of deception and self-deception, using religion to actually do some of these same things. Just take any one of those 10 stages, and we'll make sure that you have these 10 stages later, but the self-righteous bliss, how good it feels to be the right kind of Christian who's better than all those others, and so forth. And the devil loves to actually get us trapped in all of these things. And I read through these 10 and I say, yeah, that's the guy who looks at me from the mirror. He's doing these tricks all the time. And we have to just be careful. And the only remedy for this is actually Scheller's idea of love drawing us on to something greater. Love changing this so that we can actually be drawn, as we should, to everything that is beautiful, good, and true, not everything which is a deception and a lie upon lie, lie upon lie. Finally, Scheler, in the end of his book, Ressentiment, he actually goes back and, in a very moving way, talks about what Nietzsche missed. He admits that Nietzsche actually criticizes religion, and that what he criticizes is actually religion that is driven by resentment, the false religion that I've just hinted at here. And that when Nietzsche criticizes religion, he's criticizing that religion, the one that is layered in with levels of hypocrisy and self-deception and lies and repression of revenge and all these things, and using religion as part of another tool in the toolbox to do that evil thing. This is why, for instance, religious people may end up burning witches or torturing the enemy or whatever, okay, because they're involved in that same thing. This is why the religious people murdered Jesus. And Scheler comes back and says Nietzsche missed something. He missed love. He didn't understand this unknown, unexpected quality of divine love active in the world. And that true Christianity is this amazing force which comes into the world 2,000 years ago with the incoming of the Holy Spirit, in which this love is poured out on humanity in a way that no one could have envisioned and no one could have imagined. And that at the coming of the Holy Spirit, this love, this energy force from God, is poured out to draw people in a new way, in a fresh way, to a life that is free, a life that is joyful, a life that is truly seeking all that is beautiful, good, and true, and a life which has defeated this dynamic of resentment, rivalry, and revenge, which is the default setting for humanity without grace, without this infusion of love. The other thing which I picked up on that Scheler does not mention is that Nietzsche holds up this answer to resentment to be the Übermensch, the Superman, the great noble hero who's going to step out into the world stage and be all that humanity was called to be. He's going to be the person who is a race of people who steps forward and completes the great plan for the human race, and all the rest of this garbage. And the other thing that Nietzsche didn't see is he didn't understand sanctity, and he did not understand what a saint is. Because a saint is a person who has been drawn by the love, which Scheler talks about, to human completion, to the fullness of humanity. This is why before the session this evening, I was talking about wanting to write a play in which Nietzsche meets Saint Teresa of Lisieux, because the saint is the Superman. The saint is humanity fulfilled. The saint has been completed by this love, this supernatural force, which Scheler talks about, to become all that he or she was created to be. Now, this is such a beautiful promise in the face of all of the negativity that we look at with resentment, rivalry, and revenge, and why the sin of the world, therefore, is answered by this great sacrifice which is made. Next week, we're going to talk about René Girard and how his thinking about the scapegoat helps to explain why Jesus' death was the thing which defeated this cycle of resentment, rivalry, and revenge. It's 9:19 here on the East Coast, and we have a few minutes now for any questions or comments, if you would like to answer any of those, ask any of those. I hope everybody stayed with me and I wasn't too abstruse. Okay. Do we have some questions? I think, Kathy, would you like people to put them into the chat?
That would be best to go ahead and put them in the chat, unless it's something so big they can unmute themselves.
Okay. I can ask a question then and say, do you, as we're working through this, do you see examples of this in your own life, in society, in the world around you?
I do very much.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here's some questions coming in. Jacqueline says, are you going to address how to counter this in a future talk? You bet. And the second half of the book actually talks how to counter it, but we will get there eventually. But I hinted at it tonight by saying that it's being open to this love, which is this drawing, which is a supernatural gift. We can't actually break the resentment cycle on our own, and we'll talk about true forgiveness and how that works in a future session. The Black Lives Matter movement, yeah, it's a perfect example of this resentment thing which is going on. If full knowledge is necessary for sin to be grave, are people who think they are good when they are in this cycle of resentment culpable? Good question. Yeah, because I think so. I think so because at one point in this cycle, the person gives into it. The person submits to it, and uh, goes along those steps. Therefore, they will be culpable, um, even if they don't understand the psychology of it. They've given in to the temptation. Yeah, great examination of conscience too. Yeah, I'll bet. Um, Yes, a personal comment there, which I'm happy to hear from you. Um, the question about the full knowledge, I don't think you have to, you could be caught into the cycle of resentment, certainly out of ignorance. But there has to be a point in the cycle when you actually give into it and say, yes, I'm this feels good. I'm going to continue to do it. You may not understand the full psychological and philosophical dynamic as we've laid it out here, but you're aware that you're doing something which is not good, and you're giving into the resentment and you're giving into those negativities. I think most people, even with very simple understanding, would be conscious of that. Any other questions, comments? Well, one of the things in going through this, which has struck me, again, to go back to one of the points I skimmed over because I thought we didn't have quite enough time, was um, the way religion very often works into all of this. And that we see this time and again. And if you try to correct a person on this, it's almost impossible. It really is an ironclad kind of dynamic, which we cannot get out of. And all of us uh, can recognize it in ourselves and recognize it in others um, when they get into a cycle of irrationality, and you have to just step back. And it might be a dear family member or a dear friend, and they're into this cycle of irrationality and self-righteousness, and there's no conversation anymore, and your friendship is broken, and your relationship is broken. How do you mend it? If you try to blame them for self-righteousness or whatever, they will not hear it, and you may be falling into the same trap. So it really is just like a spider's web of deception and self-deception and masks and fooling people. It's just intractable. Do the 12-step programs only work at a certain step? I don't know that much about the 12-step program. I think the most crucial one people tell me about the 12-step program is the acknowledgement of the greater power. And that I've heard people in the AA say that the 12-step program, when people omit that step, or they are dubious about it, or they won't take that step, that they usually do not succeed. There's a question. Oh, yes. Kathy's answered that question about the sessions being made available. Kathy's recording these sessions and will help you to access them. Also, my tech guy, John Flynn, who, by the way, if you need a website, he's Kickstart Media. He's terrific. I recommend him to you. He's creating a new section on my blog, which is for where all the videos will be accessible really easily for you. And I'm hoping that'll be up any day now. Certainly this week it should be in place, which means you don't have to go to Dropbox and download and so forth. You can just go to the blog, and as a promotion subscriber, you'll have access to all those things.
Father, one thing I'm wondering.
In your book, The Geryon affected me the most, the body of a dragon, but the face of an honest man. You tied this in with the people of the lie. Yeah, we're going to talk about the people of the lie the week after next when we talk about Scott Peck and his book, The People of the Lie. So that's coming up. We'll be talking about that in one of the future sessions. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on Dennis's question above. Oh, I think I just mentioned that. Yeah, we're going to go into the people of the lie. Next one. Example, TLM mass goers versus Novus Ordo. It seems like there can be some resentment and a lot of self-righteousness on both sides. Oh, tell me about it. People saying, "Oh, our mass is better than your mass, and you can't do it that way because you didn't kneel to the right place." And I want to say, please, folks, we stop being so religious, um, you know, in the wrong way, of course. Um, and and if you try to say to someone, "Look, you're being self-righteous," one of the most amusing things about this is they will counter you by telling you how good they are. So it's difficult. And as a priest, speaking as a priest, I don't experience most religious people like that. Maybe I'm just blessed with a really terrific parish, but my people um, are by and large down to earth, humble, good Catholics who are doing the best they can and have a good sense of humor and a good sense of proportion about themselves and about the faith. And we don't get caught up in all of that. So I'm really, really blessed in my parish, but certainly I recognize these things happening in religious circles, and not just, of course, Catholics. I mean, any sort of religious group will tend to have some people who are like this, who are caught in this trap. What if you're directing someone and recognize these traits? You mean like in spiritual direction? Um, that's really difficult to attack it head on. And one of the best ways to actually deal with it is to ask questions. And questions might just be able to open the person's shell a little bit, and to get at the core problem in a roundabout way. But remember, the person who's in this trap has got layer upon layer upon layer of deception. And it's very difficult to unpick all of that. And very often, within a counseling situation, if the person feels that you're beginning to unpick all those different layers and masks, they'll cancel. They'll clear out. They won't come back. I'm working on a longer version of all this with a psychotherapist called Corrine Langley, hoping that we might be able to take this message to a wider audience, not just a Catholic audience. And she has some amazing case histories which unlock all of this in real life. In regards to my example, I don't know how you put up with it, Father. I see your Facebook posts and people's responses, and I shake my head in disbelief. Yes, I think you're talking about sometimes, but I try not to stir the pot very much on Twitter and Facebook, but just very often to prompt questions and to prompt thought. And my goodness, some of the people who jump in and with pure ugliness, and I'm thinking, hey, folks, you're proving my point. You're revealing yourself here in public, and the lack of empathy and the ugliness that I was talking about. Do you think this has anything to do with a lack of guidance or clarity from our current pontificate and church hierarchy? Well, I do think that, first of all, that there are a lot of good bishops and a lot of good priests, and a lot of very wise and learned men who do understand the things I'm talking about, understand a lot of this. But there is also a great lack of understanding the depth of these problems and the depth of the psychology and the philosophy behind it and the practical applications in our church and in our church life. This is combined with a news cycle which is increasingly short, and Twitter which is short, and people conducting conversations with 140 characters. You can't do that, and the church is caught up in it as well. It's a very, very complicated age in which we live. Do I wish that Pope Francis could be clearer in some of his teachings? I do, but he's not a Pope John Paul. John Paul was a brilliant man and a philosopher who understood all these things. Pope Francis has different gifts, and I think we have to just we have to roll with it right now and follow the Holy Spirit's guidance to find them, to be drawn by that, to that truth, beauty, and goodness, no matter what, as I was talking about earlier. Well, it's 9:30. We started pretty much on time, and we're going to finish on time. I appreciate you being here, and I'm quite happy to take your questions and so forth, and know that you can shoot me an email if you like. Kathy will continue to help you with some of the tech problems if need be. And next week, we're going to talk about Rene Girard and the scapegoating mechanism. So let's close with a blessing. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. The peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of his Son, Jesus Christ. And the blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, be with you this night and always. Amen. God bless you.